The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched before Ambassador Kang Daehyun like a cathedral of stars. Representatives from 147 species filled the chamber, their forms ranging from the familiar to the utterly alien. Daehyun sat in the human section, his hands folded carefully on the smooth surface of his desk. He had been Earth's voice in this place for 5 years now, but today felt different. Today felt wrong. High Chancellor Vexthar stood at the center podium, his tall frame draped in ceremonial robes that shimmered with embedded lights. The Velathor were an ancient race, their empire spanning 600 star systems. When humanity first made contact 30 years ago, the Velathor had welcomed them with open arms. Now Daehyun wondered if those arms had been a trap all along. "The Harmony Directive has brought peace to our galaxy," Vexthar announced, his voice carrying through translation devices to every ear in the chamber. 147 species now live without war, without crime, without suffering. Today we invite humanity to join this eternal peace. Daehyun felt his stomach tighten. He had heard whispers about the Harmony Directive for months, but the full details had remained classified until now. On the massive screens surrounding the chamber, images appeared of peaceful worlds. Citizens walked orderly streets. Children played in perfect harmony. Not a single conflict disturbed the serene images. "The process is simple," Vexthar continued. "A small neural implant no larger than a grain of sand, placed at the base of the skull. It gently guides aggressive impulses toward peaceful resolution. It helps citizens understand the wisdom of council law. Crime becomes unthinkable. War becomes impossible. All species who have accepted the directive report complete satisfaction." Daehyun raised his hand. The gesture activated his speaking permissions, and his voice filled the chamber. "High Chancellor, humanity appreciates the Council's concern for our welfare. However, we would like time to study this technology before making any decisions. Perhaps a research team could examine the implants and their effects." Vexthar's face remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. "Of course, Ambassador. We grant humanity 6 months to conduct research and reach a decision. However, I must inform this Council that refusal will result in necessary measures, economic sanctions, travel restrictions, and if needed, a protective blockade of human space to prevent the spread of violence to peaceful worlds." The chamber erupted in quiet murmurs. Daehyun felt the weight of every eye upon him. 6 months to decide the fate of humanity's freedom. Captain Park Min-ho received his orders 3 days later. His ship, the Perseverance, would carry a research team to 5 different worlds that had accepted the Harmony Directive. The mission was simple on paper but terrifying in reality. They needed to understand what the implants actually did to people. Dr. Choi Hana joined the mission as chief researcher. She was brilliant, driven, and deeply suspicious of anything that claimed to make people better through force. As the Perseverance left Earth orbit, she stood beside Min-ho on the bridge, watching their home planet shrink into a blue marble. "Do you think they're really happy?" she asked quietly. "All those species we saw in the presentations?" Minho had commanded ships through dangerous space for 15 years. He had faced pirates, navigated through asteroid fields, and once talked down a rogue AI that had taken control of a mining station. But nothing in his experience prepared him for what he felt looking at those images of peaceful, orderly worlds. "I think," he said carefully, "that happiness and contentment are not the same thing." Their first stop was Korath Prime, homeworld of a species that had once been legendary warriors. Ancient records described the Korath as fierce, creative, and passionate. They had produced some of the galaxy's greatest art, music, and literature. That was 200 years ago, before they accepted the Harmony Directive. Hana and her team walked through the capital city with their Korath guide, a middle-aged male named Torvik. The streets were clean, almost sterile. Buildings stood in perfect repair. Citizens moved with purpose but without urgency. Everything functioned smoothly. "Your world is very peaceful," Hana observed, watching a group of children play a game that involved passing a ball in a precise circle. There was no competition, no excitement, just repetitive motion. "Yes," Torvik agreed. His voice held no pride, no emotion at all. "We have no conflict. The directive ensures harmony. But what about art?" Hana pressed. "I read that the Korath were famous for their paintings, their music. Do you still create?" Torvik paused for a long moment as if the question required significant processing. "We have art. The directive approves certain forms of expression that promote community values. We find this satisfying." That evening, Hana broke into the city's historical archives. What she found chilled her blood. The last original Korath painting was dated 198 years ago. The last new musical composition, 197 years ago. The last novel, 196 years ago. Everything since then was either reproduction or bland, committee-approved works that said nothing, felt nothing, meant nothing. The Korath had not just stopped fighting. They had stopped being Korath, the pattern repeated on every world they visited. The Manthari, once great explorers, now never left their home system. The Quellans, whose philosophy had influenced half the galaxy, now produced no new ideas. The Vexians, master engineers who had built wonders, now only maintained what already existed. Every species reported complete satisfaction. Every species had stopped growing, changing, or creating. They existed, but they did not truly live. On the flight back to Earth, Minho found Hana in the research lab, surrounded by data screens. She had not slept in 2 days. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "It's not just suppressing aggression," she said. "The implant rewrites neural pathways related to independence, creativity, and critical thinking. It makes obedience feel natural. It makes questioning feel wrong. These species didn't choose peace, Minho. They lost the ability to choose anything else." Minho looked at the evidence she had compiled. Brain scans, behavioral analysis, historical records showing the exact moment each civilization stopped advancing. The truth was undeniable and horrifying. "They're lobotomizing entire species," he whispered, "and calling it peace," Hana finished. 3 months later, Earth's government held its vote. Every nation, every representative, every voice that spoke that day said the same thing. No. Humanity would not accept the Harmony Directive. They would not trade freedom for safety. They would not surrender their right to choose, even if that meant choosing wrongly. Ambassador Daehyun delivered Earth's answer to the Galactic Council. Vexthar listened without expression. When Daehyun finished, the High Chancellor simply nodded. "So be it," Vexthar said. "Humanity has chosen conflict over peace. The Council will respond appropriately." As Minho's ship raced back toward Earth, warning klaxons sounded. Sensors detected Velithor warships moving into position around human colonies on Mars, Europa, and Titan. The message was clear: submit or be forced to submit. On the bridge, Minho watched the enemy fleet gather. His crew looked to him for orders, for reassurance, for hope. He thought about the dead-eyed citizens of Korath Prime. He thought about civilizations that had forgotten how to dream. He thought about what it meant to be human. "Ready all defenses," he ordered. "Send a message to Earth Command. Tell them the Velithor are coming. Tell them we will not surrender. Tell them that some things are worth fighting for, even if we cannot win." Behind him, Hana gripped the edge of her console. She thought of all the species who had submitted, who had traded everything that made them unique for the promise of safety. She thought of humanity's stubborn, reckless, beautiful refusal to bow. The war was coming, and humanity would face it free. The first human colony fell on a Tuesday. Europa Station, home to 50,000 miners and their families, surrendered after 3 hours of bombardment. The Velithor fleet commander accepted their surrender with what seemed like genuine puzzlement. In his experience, most species gave up before the first shot was fired. Admiral Yoon Ji-woo watched the tactical display from Earth Defense Command, deep beneath the Korean peninsula. Red markers indicated Velithor positions. Blue markers showed human forces. There was far more red than blue. "They're not trying to destroy us," observed her tactical officer, a young man named Lieutenant Hwang Dong-hyun. "They're being careful, precise, like they're worried about breaking something valuable." Ji-woo nodded slowly. "They don't want to conquer us. They want to save us. That makes them more dangerous, not less. An enemy who thinks he's doing you a favor will never stop." On Mars, Commander Han Bo-young led what remained of the Colonial Defense Force into the mining tunnels beneath Olympus City. The Velithor had landed that morning with overwhelming force. They announced through loudspeakers that all citizens must report for implantation within 48 hours. Those who complied would be unharmed. Those who resisted would be sedated and implanted anyway. Bo-young had served in the Korean Marines before joining the colonial forces. He knew tunnel fighting. He knew guerrilla warfare. He knew how to make an occupier's life miserable. What he did not know was whether it would matter. "Commander," whispered Corporal Kim Ji-hye, crouched beside him in the darkness. "There are civilians with us. Families, children, if we fight, the Velethor will retaliate. Boyung looked at the faces around him, old and young, scared and determined. People who had come to Mars to build a new life, now hiding in holes in the ground. If we don't fight, he said quietly, there won't be any families left. Just bodies walking around with someone else's thoughts in their heads. I'd rather die human than live as something else. Jihi nodded and checked her rifle. Around them, others did the same. The Velethor occupation commander, Subjugator Rathkin, established his headquarters in the former colonial government building. He was an efficient officer, decorated for peacefully integrating 17 species into the Harmony Directive. Mars should have been simple. The humans were outnumbered, outgunned, and had no hope of victory. Logic demanded their surrender. Instead, they blew up his supply depot on the 3rd day. On the 5th day, someone hacked the atmospheric processors and filled an entire district with sleeping gas, allowing 50 prisoners to escape. On the 7th day, 3 of his troop transports mysteriously lost power and crashed into the Martian desert. These humans are irrational, Rathkin complained to his second-in-command. Every action they take worsens their position. They cannot win. Why do they persist? His second, who had studied human history, said carefully, perhaps they are not trying to win, Subjugator. Perhaps they are simply refusing to lose. Rathkin did not understand the distinction. Back on Earth, Dr. Choi Hana worked with a team of scientists in a hidden facility in the Amazon rainforest. They had captured a Velethor scout ship 2 weeks ago. The pilot had killed himself rather than be taken alive, but the ship's systems remained intact. Hana and her team worked around the clock to understand Velethor technology. Engineer Lee Sunho was the first to notice something strange about the enemy ship's AI. It was incredibly sophisticated, capable of processing millions of tactical scenarios per second. It could predict enemy movements with frightening accuracy. But it had one critical flaw. It thinks we're like them, Sunho explained to Hana, displaying complex mathematical models on his screen. The AI assumes our ships will make optimal tactical decisions. It predicts our movements based on logic and efficiency, but we don't fight that way. Hana leaned forward. What do you mean? Watch this. Sunho ran a simulation of the Battle of Europa, Earth's first major naval engagement with the Velethor. The human fleet had been outnumbered 3-1. Standard tactics said retreat was the only option. Instead, Admiral Yoon had ordered a desperate charge, sacrificing 2 destroyers to get close enough to launch boarding parties onto a Velethor carrier. It was reckless. It was wasteful. It should not have worked. But the Velethor AI had not predicted it, because no logical commander would have ordered it. The carrier was captured. The battle was still a loss, but it bought Earth precious time. They can't predict crazy, Sunho said with a tired smile. And humans, Doctor, are very good at crazy. Hana thought about this. An idea began to form in her mind, dangerous and desperate and possibly brilliant. What if, she said slowly, we stopped using AI to fly our ships? Sunho stared at her. That's insane. Modern space combat happens too fast for human reflexes. We need AI to process sensor data, calculate trajectories, manage weapon systems. I know. But what if we built ships that were slower, simpler, more manual? Ships that required human pilots to make every decision? The Velethor couldn't predict them, because there would be nothing to predict. Every pilot would fight differently. Every battle would be unique. Sunho opened his mouth to argue, then slowly closed it. He began running calculations. After an hour, he looked up with wonder in his eyes. It could work. It would be dangerous. Pilots would have to train for years. The ships would be less efficient in every measurable way. But against an enemy who relies on prediction, unpredictability might be the ultimate weapon. 3 months into the occupation of Mars, Subjugator Rathkin reported to High Chancellor Vexthar via secure communication. The High Chancellor's face appeared on the holographic display, serene and confident. Report, Subjugator. How proceeds the integration of Mars colony? Rathkin hesitated. In his entire career, he had never hesitated before. High Chancellor, the humans continued to resist. We have implanted 30% of the population, but the remainder hide in tunnels and wastelands. They sabotage our operations daily. We have lost more soldiers in 3 months than in the previous 10 integration campaigns combined. Vexthar's expression did not change, but something cold entered his voice. Are they exceptionally well armed? No, High Chancellor. Their weapons are inferior to ours. Are they receiving outside support? No, High Chancellor. We have blockaded the planet completely. Then explain their continued resistance. Rathkin struggled to find words. How could he explain what he did not understand himself? They fight as if they have hope, even when they have none. They sacrifice themselves for gains that seem meaningless. Yesterday, a human female detonated a bomb in our medical center. She killed herself and 20 of our medics. When we investigated, we found she was a doctor herself. She destroyed her own profession out of spite. Spite, repeated Vexthar, tasting the unfamiliar word. The directive eliminates such inefficient emotions. Yes, High Chancellor, but the humans do not have the directive, and I am beginning to think... Rathkin stopped himself. Beginning to think what, subjugator? Nothing, High Chancellor. I will continue the integration as ordered. But after the communication ended, Rathkin sat alone in his office and thought about the human doctor, who had blown herself up rather than live under occupation. He tried to understand what could drive such an action. The answer eluded him. His own directive implant, installed when he was a child, gently redirected his thoughts toward more productive topics. In the tunnels beneath Olympus City, Commander Han Boyong gathered his fighters for a briefing. They had been underground for 3 months. Food was running low. Medical supplies were nearly gone. Half his people were wounded. Every day, more civilians chose to surrender and accept implantation rather than continue suffering. I won't lie to you, Boyong said, looking at the tired, dirty faces around him. We can't win this fight. Not here, not like this. The Velathor are too strong, too many. Every day we lose people. Every day our situation gets worse. He paused, seeing despair settle onto shoulders already bowed by exhaustion. But, he continued, winning isn't the point. We're not fighting to win. We're fighting to be the grain of sand in the machine. We're fighting to make them bleed for every inch of Mars. We're fighting to show every other species in this galaxy that humans don't kneel. And maybe, just maybe, we're fighting to buy Earth enough time to find a way to save us all. Corporal Kim Ji-hee spoke up. Commander, even if Earth finds a way to beat the Velathor, we'll probably be dead before then. Or worse, we'll be implanted. Boyong nodded. Probably. But our children will be free. And that's enough. He saw understanding dawn on their faces. They were not fighting for themselves. They were fighting for a future they might never see. It was a very human thing to do. On Earth, Admiral Yoon Ji-woo received reports of the resistance on Mars. She read about Commander Han Boyong and his tunnel fighters. She read about ordinary citizens who chose death over implantation. She read about a war that could not be won but refused to be lost, and she began to plan. Engineer Lee Sun-ho's mad idea about human-piloted ships was taking shape. They had 3 months, maybe 4, before the Velathor moved on Earth itself. It was not enough time. But humans had never let impossible odds stop them before. Alert all defense fleets, she ordered. Begin recruiting pilots for the new ship program. Tell them the truth. Tell them the ships are dangerous, the training is brutal, and their chances. The Velathor invasion fleet entered Earth's solar system on a cold January morning. 300 warships, each one a masterpiece of military engineering, arranged in perfect geometric formation. High Chancellor Vexthar commanded from the flagship Eternal Order. Confident this would be a quick campaign. Mars had taken longer than expected, but Earth would surely see reason. Humans were clever. Surely they understood they could not win. Sergeant Kim Ha-jun watched the fleet approach from his position in the ruins of what used to be a shopping district in Seoul. His squad had spent 3 months turning the city into a trap. Buildings were rigged to collapse. Streets were mined. Sewer systems were flooded and electrified. Every park, every alley, every subway tunnel held a nasty surprise. Sergeant, whispered Private Lee Sujin, there are so many of them. Ha-jun looked at the young soldier, barely 19 years old. Yes, there are. But they have to come down here to implant us. And down here, they're just targets like any other. The Velathor landing craft descended on Seoul at dawn. Subjugator Rathkin, recalled from Mars for his experience with human resistance, led the ground forces. He had learned painful lessons on the Red Planet. He would not underestimate humans again. His forces advanced carefully through the empty streets. Too carefully. The humans had evacuated the entire city, turning it into a ghost town. Rathkin's tactical AI marked probable ambush points, but the silence was unnerving. Where were the defenders? The answer came when his lead column reached City Hall. The entire building collapsed, triggered by explosives hidden in its foundation. Rubble buried 20 soldiers. Before the dust settled, gunfire erupted from a dozen hidden positions. Rathikin's troops returned fire, their superior weapons cutting through concrete and steel. But the humans were already gone, vanished into tunnels and sewers like smoke. For 3 days, Rathikin fought for control of Seoul. His forces outnumbered the defenders 10-1. His weapons were superior. His soldiers were better trained. Yet every block cost lives. Every building held traps. The humans did not fight fair. They used the city itself as a weapon, collapsing tunnels, flooding streets, turning everyday infrastructure into deadly obstacles. "They're using civilian infrastructure as military assets," complained one of Rathikin's officers. "That violates the Galactic Convention on Warfare." Rathikin almost laughed. "They never signed the convention, and I suspect they would not care if they had. These humans do not fight by our rules because they are not trying to win by our standards. They are simply trying to make us bleed." High above, Dr. Bakesoman worked in a hidden laboratory beneath Seoul National University. She was not a soldier or an engineer. She was a psychologist, and she had been studying the Velathor prisoners captured during the invasion. What she discovered changed everything. The Velathor themselves wore implants, not the crude harmony directive forced on subjugated species, but a more sophisticated version implanted at birth. It enhanced their logical thinking, suppressed emotional responses, and most importantly, ensured absolute obedience to authority. The Velathor were not evil conquerors. They were victims of their own technology, so thoroughly controlled they could not even recognize their slavery. Soman brought her findings to Admiral Yoon Ji-woo in Earth Defense Command. "They're predictable because they have no choice but to be predictable. The implant makes them incapable of truly creative thought. They can innovate within established parameters, but they cannot imagine entirely new approaches. That's why they keep losing to our tactics. They literally cannot think the way we do." Yoon studied the brain scans and psychological profiles. "Can we use this?" "Maybe. If we can find a way to disrupt their implants, even temporarily, it might cause confusion in their command structure. They're not used to independent thought. Give them freedom suddenly and they might not know what to do with it." Captain Otajan tested Earth's first independent pilot ship 3 weeks into the invasion. The vessel, designated Ghost 1, was a stripped-down fighter with manual controls and no AI assistance. Every system required human input. It was slower and clumsier than standard fighters, but it was also invisible to Velathor predictive algorithms. Taejin took Ghost 1 into battle above the moon, where a Velathor supply fleet was regrouping. His orders were simple: cause chaos. He danced between enemy ships, making decisions on pure instinct, using tricks no AI would consider. He flew too close, too fast, too recklessly. The Velathor point defense systems could not track him, because they kept trying to predict his next move based on logic, and nothing Taejin did was logical. He destroyed 3 supply ships before enemy fighters scrambled to intercept. Then he did something truly insane. He cut his engines and let momentum carry him directly toward a Velathor battlecruiser. The enemy assumed mechanical failure and ignored him, focusing on other targets. At the last second, Taejin fired every weapon he had into the battlecruiser's sensor array and reignited his engines, threading through the enemy formation at speeds that should have killed him. He made it back to Earth with his ship held together by prayer and profanity. Admiral Yoon met him on the landing deck. "That was the stupidest, most reckless flying I have ever seen," she said. Then she smiled. "Do it again," and trained 50 other pilots to be just as stupid. The war dragged into its 2nd month. The Velathor controlled most major cities, but they could not control the resistance. Humans fought from sewers, forests, mountains, and oceans. They used stolen Velathor weapons. They built bombs from fertilizer and fuel. They hacked enemy communications and spread disinformation. They were everywhere and nowhere, an enemy that refused to present a target or accept defeat. In the occupied zones, implantation continued. Hundreds of thousands of humans received the Harmony Directive. They became calm, compliant, and empty. The resistance watched their friends and family members become strangers wearing familiar faces. It was worse than death. Captain Otaijin led his squadron on a desperate mission. Deep in Velathor space, past dozens of security checkpoints, lay the central communication hub. It broadcast propaganda and orders to conquered worlds across the galaxy. Earth's plan was to hijack that broadcast and tell the truth about the Harmony Directive. 50 pilots flew in 50 directions, each carrying a copy of the broadcast. The Velothor could not predict which one was the real target because none of them were. All 50 were real targets. It was redundancy born of desperation, and it worked. Tajin's ship reached the hub with 47 other pilots lost behind him. He crashed through the station's defenses, uploaded the broadcast, and transmitted it across every channel. For 10 minutes before the Velothor shut it down, the truth played across 1,000 worlds, footage from liberated prisoners, brain scans showing neural damage, testimony from the few Velothor whose implants had malfunctioned, giving them brief glimpses of freedom. On Korath Prime, an old male named Torvik watched the broadcast. He was the same guide who had shown Dr. Choi Hanna around years ago. Something in the images stirred memories he should not have, memories of a time before the directive, when Korath painted and sang and lived with passion. His implant tried to suppress the memories, but they kept coming. He began to weep, though he did not understand why. Similar reactions occurred across 17 worlds. The broadcast had planted seeds of doubt. The implants could suppress active rebellion, but they struggled against passive questioning. People began to wonder if their satisfaction was real or programmed. In the Velothor fleet, mediator Sinvara experienced something unprecedented. He was a mid-level official responsible for managing subjugated populations. He had performed his duties efficiently for 43 years without a single moment of doubt. Then he watched the human broadcast. His implant immediately flagged the content as dangerous and tried to redirect his attention, but Sinvara had learned to recognize that feeling over the years. Every time he questioned an order or noticed an inconsistency, the implant gently pushed his thoughts elsewhere. He had always accepted this as normal. Now, for the first time, he wondered what thoughts were being taken from him. The wondering became a crack. The crack became a gap. The gap became a chasm. Over the following days, Sinvara felt his implant failing as he fought against it. The process was agonizing. Every attempt to think independently brought physical pain. But he persisted, driven by something the implant could not suppress because he did not understand it himself. Humans called it curiosity. On Earth, Sergeant Kim Ha-jun and his squad prepared to abandon Seoul. They had held the city for 41 days, far longer than anyone expected. But ammunition was gone. Food was gone. Most of his soldiers were wounded. The Velothor had finally adapted to their tactics and was systematically clearing every tunnel and bunker. "We did good," Ha-jun told his remaining troops. "We made them pay for every meter. We showed them that humans don't surrender. Now we fall back to the next line. Keep fighting." Private Lee Sujin, who had somehow survived 6 weeks of urban warfare, looked at her sergeant with hollow eyes. "Is it enough? All this fighting, all these deaths, is it enough to matter?" Ha-jun thought about the broadcast Captain Otajin had made. He thought about the resistance on Mars and Europa and Titan. He thought about Admiral Yoon's ghost fleet and the thousands of humans. Scientist Park Yoonji had not slept in 4 days. Her laboratory, hidden in a converted mine shaft in Norway, smelled of ozone and desperation. On the workbench before her lay humanity's most dangerous weapon. It was not a bomb or a gun. It was a small device no bigger than a medical scanner, and it could free minds from slavery. They called it the Liberator. It generated a precisely calibrated electromagnetic pulse that disrupted the Harmony directive implants without causing permanent brain damage. The process was painful and dangerous. 10% of test subjects died. 20% suffered seizures or psychological trauma, but 70% survived with their minds restored. Dr. Choi Hanna stood beside Yoonji watching the final tests. "Are we ready?" Yoonji rubbed her burning eyes. "As ready as we'll ever be. The question is, are they ready? We'll be giving them back everything the directive took. Grief, anger, pain, the memory of what was done to them. Some might not survive the psychological shock. Some will wish they hadn't survived," Hanna agreed quietly. "But slavery is not kindness just because the slave doesn't know they're enslaved. We have to try." General Nam Ji-young received the Liberator prototypes with mixed feelings. She was a soldier, trained to think in terms of tactics and strategy. The Liberator was not a military weapon in the traditional sense. It was something more dangerous and unpredictable. It was hope. "How do we deploy them?" she asked her staff officers. "We can't exactly walk into occupied territories and ask the Velothor nicely if we can free their prisoners." Captain Lee Min-jae stepped forward. He commanded a special operations unit that had spent the last 3 months conducting raids behind enemy lines. We don't ask permission. We have intelligence on 19 internment camps where implanted humans are being held before reassignment. We hit them all simultaneously. Free as many as we can. Get them to safe zones where they can recover. It was a desperate plan. It would cost lives. But doing nothing would cost souls, and that was a price humanity refused to pay. The raids began at midnight on a moonless night. 19 teams struck 19 camps. The fighting was brutal and quick. The Velethor guards, used to compliant prisoners, were overwhelmed by the ferocity of the attacks. Captain Lee Min-jae personally led the assault on Camp 7, outside former Tokyo. The prisoners shuffled out of their cells, calm and obedient, even as gunfire echoed around them. Min-jae felt sick looking at their empty eyes. He recognized some of them. Friends, former soldiers, people he had served with. All of them gone, replaced by docile copies. "Deploy the liberators," he shouted. His team activated the devices. The prisoners collapsed screaming. Their implants fought the electromagnetic pulse, causing seizures and pain. Some died instantly. Others thrashed on the ground, experiencing every suppressed emotion from the moment of their implantation, flooding back at once. When it was over, 63 prisoners lay dead. 112 survivors huddled on the ground, weeping or screaming or simply staring in horror at their own hands. They remembered everything: being captured, being forced to accept the implant, watching themselves act against their will while a small part of them screamed uselessly inside their own heads. A woman Min-jae recognized, former Lieutenant Park Yuna, looked up at him with devastated eyes. "How long?" she whispered.
"How long was I gone?"
3 months, Min-jae said gently. Yuna began to laugh. It was not a happy sound. 3 months. I watched myself inform on my squad. I heard myself tell the Velethor where the resistance hid. I saw my hands enter the coordinates, and I could do nothing. Nothing. Just watch and scream inside while my body obeyed. Min-jae knelt beside her. "It wasn't you. You were a prisoner in your own mind." "I know," Yuna said, "but I remember. I'll always remember, and I don't know if I can live with that." Across 19 camps, similar scenes played out. Of 3,000 freed prisoners, 800 died during the liberation process. Another 300 took their own lives within days, unable to bear the memories of what they had been forced to do. The remaining survivors were traumatized, broken, and furious. They were also free, and they wanted revenge. The Korath were the first subjugated species to be liberated. Captain Lee Min-jae led a fleet carrying liberator devices to Korath Prime. They broadcast their intentions openly, giving the Korath people a choice: accept liberation and face the pain of freedom, or remain in comfortable slavery. The Velethor government ordered all Korath to ignore the broadcast. But something had changed. The seeds of doubt planted by the human transmission months ago had grown. When the liberator devices activated, 2 billion Korath chose not to resist. The pain was unimaginable. 2 billion minds screaming as 200 years of suppressed emotion returned in a flood. Some died. Many wished they had died. But most survived, and what emerged from that crucible of agony was terrible to behold. The Korath remembered what they had been: proud, fierce, creative. They remembered their art, their music, their stories. They remembered a culture that had spanned millennia, erased in a single generation by the Harmony Directive. They remembered their children, born into slavery, never knowing what their species once was. And they remembered who had done this to them. The Velethor garrison on Korath Prime numbered 50,000 soldiers. They were well-armed, well-trained, and utterly unprepared for what happened next. 2 billion Korath, freed from the directive's suppression of violence, rose as one and tore the occupiers apart. It was not a battle. It was a massacre born of centuries of suppressed rage. General Nam Ji-young watched the reports from Korath Prime with horror. They're not stopping. They're killing every Velethor they can find. Soldiers, officials, even civilians who were just administrators. Dr. Choi Hana felt sick. We broke their chains. But we didn't think about what happens when you free someone who has been tortured for generations. The Korath aren't seeking justice. They're seeking vengeance. Can we stop them? Asked Admiral Yoon Ji-woo. Should we? Hana countered. The Velethor did this to them for 200 years. Every Korath alive today was born into slavery. Their parents, grandparents, great-grandparents all enslaved. What right do we have to tell them how to respond? It was a question with no good answer. The pattern repeated across 17 worlds. The Manthari, the Quellans, the Vexians, each species freed. Each species remembering what had been taken from them. Each species turning on their former masters with the fury of the betrayed. The Velethor Empire, which had known only compliance for centuries, drowned in a wave of rebellion. High Chancellor Vexthar watched his empire burn. Reports flooded in from every sector. Rebellions, massacres, his carefully ordered galaxy descending into chaos. He called an emergency meeting of the Velethor High Command. The humans have destroyed everything, one admiral said, his voice tight with poorly suppressed emotion. Even with the implant, the situation was causing cracks.
They did not defeat us militarily.
They defeated us by removing our greatest strength, the compliance of our subjects. We should have destroyed Earth when we had the chance, another officer said. Now it is too late. We are outnumbered. The freed species coordinate with human forces. We face not one enemy but 20. Vexithar sat in silence, processing the enormity of what had happened. The Velethor had controlled the galaxy through the Harmony Directive for 600 years. They had believed they were bringing peace, eliminating conflict, elevating primitive species to enlightenment. Now they faced the truth. They had been slavers calling slavery freedom. Mediator Sinvara stood before the council. His implant completely failed now. He had spent weeks fighting against it, and the victory had left him changed. He could think freely for the first time in his life, and what he thought horrified him. We must end this, he said, not by force, not by reimposing the directive. We must surrender. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Surrender was not a concept the Velethor understood. The directive made defeat unthinkable. They will destroy us, protested one council member. You saw what the Korath did. They murdered civilians, children. If we surrender, they will show no mercy. Perhaps we do not deserve mercy, Sinvara said quietly. We enslaved entire civilizations. We erased cultures. We called it peace and told ourselves we were righteous. The humans showed us the truth and we attacked them for it. Now we reap what we have sown. High Chancellor Vexthar looked at Sinvara with something approaching respect. You speak treason, mediator. I speak truth, High Chancellor, and I believe you know it. Your implant is failing too. I can see it. We all feel it. The cognitive dissonance is too great. We cannot maintain the lie anymore. Vexithar was silent for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. Open a channel to Earth. I will speak with their leaders. Captain Lee Minjae stood on the bridge of the First Liberation Fleet as it approached the Velethor homeworld. His orders were clear. Do not attack unless attacked first. The fleet carried enough firepower to reduce the planet to ash, but also millions of Liberator devices. The choice of what happened next lay with the Velethor themselves. Admiral Yoon Jiwoo's voice came through the communication system. All ships hold position. We have received a transmission from High Chancellor Vexithar. He requests negotiation. Minjae exchanged glances with his crew. After everything, could it really be this simple? 5 years after the fall of the Velethor Empire, President Shin Jiho stood before the reformed Galactic Council. The chamber was the same, but everything else had changed. Where once sat representatives of subjugated species, now sat free beings struggling to remember what freedom meant. The meeting was chaos. Delegates shouted over each other. Old grievances surfaced. Territorial disputes erupted. The careful order the Velethor had maintained through the Harmony Directive was gone, replaced by the messy reality of beings with free will. Many in the chamber looked exhausted. Some looked angry. A few looked ready to walk out entirely. Ambassador Kwan Mirai, Earth's new representative, approached the podium with President Shin. She had been a young diplomat when the war began. Now she carried the weight of galaxies on her shoulders. The freed species looked to humanity for leadership, whether humanity wanted that burden or not. Honored delegates, Shin began, his voice cutting through the noise. I know these past 5 years have been difficult. Crime has returned to your worlds. Conflicts have erupted. Some of you have expressed regret about accepting liberation. You remember the peace under the directive and wonder if we made a mistake. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The Quellan delegate stood, his tentacles quivering with emotion. President Shin, my world descends into civil war. Before the directive, we had philosophical differences. Now those differences kill thousands. We had 200 years of peace. Now we have bloodshed. Was this truly better? Shin nodded slowly. The directive gave you peace the way death gives peace. Yes, you have conflict now. You also have choice. You have art, you have innovation. You have the right to be wrong, to fail, to try again. The directive did not give you peace. It gave you a tomb painted to look like paradise. The Manthari delegate, an elderly female named Soren, spoke next. But at what cost, President Shin? We have lost millions to violence, crime, and accidents that would never have occurred under the directive. Our children are born into uncertainty. Is this freedom worth so much suffering? It was Dr. Choi Hana who answered, standing beside Shin. She had spent 5 years working with traumatized populations, helping freed species adjust to autonomy. Her hair had gone gray early. Lines creased her face. But her voice remained steady. Yes, she said simply, because the alternative is not living. It is existing while calling it life. My species never knew the directive. We have always been free. And yes, we suffer. We make terrible choices. We hurt each other and ourselves. We fail constantly. But we also love, create, dream, and grow. These things cannot exist without freedom. You cannot have joy without the possibility of pain. You cannot have meaning without choice. Former High Chancellor Vexthar sat in the Velithor section, a humbled old male surrounded by his people's survivors. His implant had been removed 5 years ago and the experience had shattered him. He saw clearly now what his civilization had done. The weight of that knowledge aged him decades in months. He stood slowly and the chamber fell silent. Many species still hated the Velithor, blamed them for centuries of slavery. But Vexithar had become a symbol of atonement, working tirelessly to help victims of the directive. I speak as one who lived a lie for 83 years, he said, his voice heavy with sorrow. The directive told me I was content. It told me I was fulfilled. It lied. I was a puppet, and I did not even know there were strings. When the humans freed me, I wanted to die. The guilt nearly destroyed me. But I survived, and now I can say with certainty, this messy, painful, chaotic freedom is infinitely preferable to the peaceful slavery I knew. Do not go back to the chains, no matter how comfortable they feel. Mediator Sinvara, now a leading voice for Velithor rehabilitation, added, we Velithor enslaved ourselves first, then spread that slavery across the galaxy. We told ourselves it was for the greater good. We believed our own propaganda. The humans showed us that comfort purchased with freedom is not worth the price. They paid in blood to teach us that lesson. We must not waste that gift. Commander Park Seoyun entered the chamber, just back from a humanitarian mission to the Korath homeworld. She looked tired but determined. The Korath recovery had been particularly difficult. Centuries of suppressed warrior culture had exploded in violence before slowly stabilizing. President Shin, may I speak? She asked. Shin gestured for her to approach. Seoyun had become known throughout the galaxy for her work helping species adjust to freedom. She spent months on different worlds, teaching practical skills for managing emotions, resolving conflicts, and rebuilding cultures destroyed by the directive. I just returned from Korath Prime, she reported. They are struggling. Many young Korath have no memory of their culture before the directive. They are trying to recreate it from fragments and old records. It is painful work. They make mistakes. Some customs they remember incorrectly, some they invent entirely. But I watched them paint yesterday. Real art created from genuine emotion. The first new Korath painting in 200 years. It was crude and angry and beautiful. That is worth all the difficulty. The Korath delegate, a scarred warrior named Thorin, spoke with gruff emotion. Commander Seoyun speaks truth. My people suffer. We are violent and confused. We do not know who we are anymore. But we are becoming something. The directive made us nothing. I choose this painful something over that peaceful nothing. President Shin saw the doubt in many faces begin to soften. These species had lived through hell to gain their freedom. Now they struggled with whether that freedom was worth it. They needed to understand that the struggle itself was the point. Let me tell you about Earth, Shin said. My species has never known peace. We have fought wars for thousands of years. We have made terrible mistakes. We have hurt each other in ways that shame us. Even now, with the galaxy watching, we have conflicts and problems. But we also have something the directive could never give. We have meaning. Every choice matters because we could have chosen differently. Every achievement matters because we could have failed. Every love matters because we could have hated. Freedom is not easy. It was never meant to be easy. Easy is what the directive offered. We offer you something harder and infinitely more valuable, the chance to be truly alive. Admiral Yoon Ji-woo, now retired but still influential, sent a message that was played for the council. She had lost her left leg in the final battle of the war and refused a prosthetic, saying the pain reminded her what they had fought for. To the delegates who doubt, her recorded message began, I ask you this. Under the directive, could you have chosen to attend this council meeting? Could you have chosen to complain about your government? Could you have chosen to disagree with your leaders? The answer is no. Every action, every thought was guided by the implant. You are not living. You are being lived through. Now you can choose. That includes the choice to make mistakes, the choice to be wrong, the choice to fail. These are not bugs in freedom. They are features. Cherish them. The council debated for hours. Some species wanted to form a new central authority to impose order. Others wanted complete autonomy for each world. The arguments grew heated. At one point, two delegates nearly came to blows. Ambassador Kwon Mireille had to call for order. Look at what we are doing, she said. We are arguing, disagreeing. This would have been impossible under the directive. You call this chaos. I call this democracy. You call this conflict. I call this freedom. Yes, it is uncomfortable. Yes, it is messy. But it is real in a way the directive never was. A new crisis emerged during the council session. Reports came of another empire, far beyond explored space, that used technology similar to the Harmony Directive. This empire, called the Concordat, had existed for 1,000 years in forced harmony. Long-range scouts had detected their signals. The council erupted in debate. Some wanted to ignore the Concordat, claiming Earth had caused enough disruption. Others wanted to prepare defenses in case the Concordat attacked. A few voices called for immediate military intervention to liberate them. President Shin listened to the arguments, then raised his hand for silence. We cannot ignore them. We cannot attack them, but we can offer them a choice. The same choice we gave the Velethor. The same choice we offered every species we freed. We will send a small diplomatic ship with the design for the Liberator device. We will tell them the truth about what the directive does. What they choose to do with that information is up to them. And if they choose to remain as they are, asked the Manthari delegate Soren. Then we respect that choice, Shin replied. Freedom includes the freedom to refuse freedom. We will not force liberation any more than the Velethor should have forced submission. We offer the truth. They must decide what to do with it. Admiral Park Min-ho, son of the original Captain Park who had investigated the directive years ago, volunteered to lead the mission. He was young, idealistic, and had grown up on stories of his father's bravery. He assembled a small crew of humans and freed species who wanted to spread the message of liberty. As his ship, named Perseverance II in honor of his father's vessel, prepared to launch, Ambassador Kang Dae-hyun, now ancient but still sharp, came to see him off. Dae-hyun had been the first human to refuse the directive. Now he would be one of the last witnesses to its final echo.